You can always tell when a room is holding its breath. No matter where you've been in life, a hospital hallway, a confession night at church, even that office moment when HR calls you in unexpectedly. There's this certain type of silence you never forget. The kind where the air feels like it's balancing on the edge of something terrible, waiting to fall. This is the silence of the Jinx. That's the kind of silence that filled the interview room the day Robert Durst forgot to turn his microphone off. I remember the way the crew froze. Even if you've never worked with cameras, you'd recognize that moment. That mix of, should we be hearing this? And, oh my God, don't breathe or you'll scare the moment away. It wasn't dramatic at first. No thunder, no eerie score, no Hollywood build-up. Just a man muttering to himself in the bathroom, like he'd done 1,000 times before. Except this time, the world was listening. But that wasn't where the story began. And honestly, it wasn't where the story should have ended either. Because before that microphone, before the murders and the lies and the missing persons, before the hot mic that confirmed the worst of it, there was just a little boy watching his mother fall off a roof. And I don't care how tough someone pretends to be. Something like that stays in your bones forever. Most people know the name Durst because of real estate. Skyscrapers, Manhattan power, money older than some countries' independence. But before he became Robert the suspect, or Robert the runaway, or Robert the man who burped through a murder interview, he was simply the eldest son of one of the most intimidating families on the East Coast. Let me tell you something I've learned over time. Every villain has an origin story. The problem is, sometimes the beginning looks too normal to be suspicious. The Durst mansion wasn't just wealth. It was structure, control, reputation. Imagine being born into a world where your footsteps are practically scheduled, and even your childhood feels like a business meeting you weren't prepared for. But trauma doesn't care about your zip code. When Robert was 7, he witnessed something no child should ever have to see. His mother, Bernice, standing on the roof of their home in the freezing night air. There are families that pretend tragedies don't happen, but the Dursts? They pretended harder than most. Some say she fell, others say she jumped. The truth sits in that uneasy gray area we all avoid thinking about. Robert saw her up there, and then he saw her no more. Moments like that don't just disappear. They turn into echoes, the kind that show up in your adulthood disguised as strange behavior, cold emotions, and decisions that make everyone around you say, something's not right with him. And honestly, they were right. But let's not jump ahead. You ever meet someone who speaks like they're reading from a teleprompter, even in normal conversation? That was the Durst family. Everything polished, everything manicured, everything the way wealthy families like to appear in magazines. But in the middle of all that gloss and shine, the Durst brothers were quietly drifting apart. Douglas, the younger one, was everything the family wanted: composed, presentable, controllable. Robert? He was the wild card. The one who didn't smile properly during family photos. The one who seemed to live in his own head. The one who could be in a room but somehow not there. I've always believed that you can track a man's darkness back to the moment he feels unseen. And Robert spent most of his life feeling like a shadow in a home that already had too many lights. He never fit the mold. He never played the role. He never hid his discomfort. And for a family obsessed with appearances, that was a problem. So when their father eventually handed control of the empire to Douglas instead of Robert, it wasn't just a business decision. It was an emotional blow. A reminder that even his own family didn't trust him. And if you want to understand Robert Durst, truly understand him, you need to understand this. He never forgave them. Not for choosing Douglas, not for doubting him, and definitely not for pretending nothing was wrong with him. That sense of exclusion, that simmering resentment, it travels with a person. It festers. It shapes choices. It prepares the ground for decisions that destroy lives. But at that time, no one was watching closely enough to see the cracks forming. And the first life that would shatter because of those cracks belonged to a woman named Kathleen. Before you hear this part, let me say something plainly. Kathleen McCormack deserved so much better than the life she walked into. She was young. The kind of young where you still believe you shape the world, not the other way around.
She was ambitious, studying to become a doctor, driven in a way you don't see often anymore. She had dreams that stretched beyond whatever zip code she lived in. And then she met Robert Durst. At first, he was charming in that odd, socially misaligned way that some people find endearing. You know when someone is awkward enough to be interesting? That was him. A little strange, yes, but not threatening. A bit stiff, but attentive. Unpredictable, but generous. Looking back, there were signs. Of course there were. There always are. The mood swings, the sudden coldness, the controlling behavior dressed up as concern, the subtle comments that made her shrink instead of shine. But when you're young and in love, you give excuses like free samples. He's just stressed. He's just tired. He's just worried about me. And before you know it, you're explaining away things that should have sent you running. They married. They built a life. They looked, from the outside, like a wealthy New York couple living a dream. But behind closed doors, Kathleen was living something closer to a psychological maze. One built brick by Robert's instability. Friends noticed. Family noticed. Some even tried to help. But people like Robert, they know how to keep things just hidden enough. And then one night, January 31st, 1982, she vanished. Just like that. The world blinked and she was gone. And if you've ever followed a missing persons case, you know the stomach drop feeling of that first 48 hours. The frantic theories, the frantic calls, the frantic hope. But in this case, there was no frantic Durst, no panic, no desperation. Just a calm, detached man telling police, she probably ran away. I don't know who needed to hear this, but let me put it plainly. People don't run away right before graduating from medical school. They don't run away after making plans with friends. They don't run away from their own lives when those lives are just beginning. But Robert said it so casually, so confidently, that some people actually believed him. And that was the first failure, but not the last. If you've ever wondered what privilege looks like in real time, the investigation into Kathleen's disappearance is one of the clearest examples I can offer. The moment her name was reported missing, the case should have exploded like a flare in the sky. A young medical student, married to a millionaire, vanishing under suspicious circumstances. That's the kind of case detectives usually sink their teeth into. Except they didn't, or couldn't, or wouldn't. Pick whichever verb keeps you up at night. Because the Durst family wasn't just wealthy, they were connected. Phone calls were made, favors were exchanged, and slowly, quietly, the urgency drained from the investigation. Police didn't push hard. Detectives didn't dig deep. Evidence wasn't properly collected. Witnesses weren't aggressively followed up. And if you think that's frustrating to listen to now, imagine living it. Her family begged for answers. They pleaded. They cried. They demanded the case be handled properly. But the deeper truth is this. Kathleen's disappearance became the opening chapter in the story of how Robert Durst learned he could get away with almost anything. And once a man believes he's untouchable, you'd be amazed at how quickly things unravel. If Kathleen's disappearance was the beginning of Robert's darkness, then Susan Berman was the person who helped keep it hidden. Susan wasn't just a friend. She was loyal in a way that most people only pray for. Fiercely protective, overly invested, and willing to defend Robert against anyone, including the police. She was the person he called when things felt dangerous. She was the one who spoke for him when his voice didn't sound convincing enough. She was the shield he held up whenever scrutiny got too close. And for decades, she stayed silent. But people don't remain silent forever. At least, not when they know too much. Years later, detectives would learn that Susan might have been the one who made a crucial phone call pretending to be Kathleen. A call that misled investigators. A call that bought Robert more time. But when time began running out and detectives came looking for answers, Susan suddenly found herself in a dangerous position. She knew the truth. And Robert knew she knew. And if history teaches us anything about Robert Durst, it's that people who become liabilities don't stay around for long. If the previous segment left you with a knot in your stomach, then trust me, that discomfort is earned. Because the moment we continue, we aren't in the territory of suspicion anymore. We're in the territory of protection. The dangerous kind. The kind that binds people together not through love, but through secrets. And Susan Berman, she knew more than anyone should ever know about Robert Durst.
Now let me tell you something personal. I've always believed that the people closest to us are usually the ones holding the sharpest knives. Not because they want to hurt us, but because they're the ones close enough to do it without missing. Susan? She held a whole pocket full of knives. She just didn't know which one would be the one Robert would fear. Or maybe she did. And that's what made her dangerous. If you ever met someone who makes a room feel brighter just by sitting in it, that was Susan. Loud, dramatic, funny without trying. The kind of woman who could make a story about going to the grocery store sound like she'd survived a CIA sting operation. And Robert loved that about her, until he didn't. Because loyalty becomes a liability when the police start sniffing around your past. By the late 1990s, investigators began turning their attention back to Kathleen's disappearance. And the closer they got to Robert, the more they noticed something odd. A friend named Susan seemed to know all the wrong things. She had been his confidant, his spokesperson, the person he hid behind, and most importantly, the one he trusted the night Kathleen disappeared. But when detectives reached out, Susan didn't hide. She didn't run. She didn't shut the door. She started talking. And for a man whose life relied on silence, that was the beginning of a very dangerous countdown. Now here's the thing about secrets. They don't just sit quietly like books on a shelf. They hum, they pulse, they poke at you. One day you wake up and you realize the secret is living more aggressively than you are. And Susan was living with a secret big enough to bury both of them. So when she got a letter from Robert, just a simple envelope, nothing glamorous, she didn't think twice about opening it. But she should have. Because inside that envelope was a single word. A word that shouldn't make sense on a casual letter between friends. A word that sounded more like an omen than a greeting. Beverly. Spelled wrong. Just like a letter the police would later receive from someone telling them where to find Susan's body. Some things are too ironic to be coincidences. December 24th, 2000. Most people were wrapping gifts, preparing meals, drowning in last-minute Christmas panic. Meanwhile, Susan's house in Los Angeles sat in a silence so heavy it made the walls feel like they were listening. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't show up to holiday gatherings. She didn't check in with friends. And if you've ever had that moment, that stomach-pulling dread when someone you know is acting off, you know how quickly concern becomes fear. Her neighbors called. Her godson called. Her friends called. Nobody got an answer. And then someone finally went to check. Susan was found lying on the floor of her home, a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Execution style. No forced entry, no robbery, no struggle. You don't need a detective badge to understand what that means. People let friends into their homes. They don't expect friends to kill them. And here's something cruelly ironic. In her final moment, Susan was betrayed by the same loyalty she spent decades giving. Now here's where the story takes one of those left turns that dark past stories often take. The kind that forces you to lean forward and whisper, "Wait, what?" Because while investigators were scrambling to understand what happened in Los Angeles, Robert Durst was in a completely different place, living a completely different life, as a completely different person. Let me ask you something. Have you ever known someone who takes a problem and tries to solve it in the most unnecessarily complicated way possible? Like instead of apologizing to someone they offended, they change their phone number, dye their hair, and move to another state. That's what Robert Durst did. Except his version was somehow stranger than fiction. After Susan's murder, he didn't just hide. He reinvented himself. He fled to Galveston, Texas, a quiet, unassuming coastal town. And there, he rented a cheap apartment, under a new identity, as, and I swear I am not exaggerating, a mute woman named Dorothy Siner. Yes, mute. He pretended he couldn't speak. Now look, I have lived through enough wild moments to have some tolerance for strange behavior, but this felt like the universe pausing to look around and say, Is anyone else seeing this? He wore women's clothing, shopped at local stores, kept his head down, barely interacted. He mimed for communication. If you ever needed a moment of subtle comic relief, trust me, imagining Robert Durst silently gesturing at a grocery store cashier because he needed canned soup might be one of the only moments in this story where the absurdity pushes the darkness aside for one breath.
But beneath the absurdity was something far more chilling. People don't go to these lengths unless they are running from something they fully expect to catch them. And whatever guilt or fear he felt, it was strong enough to make him abandon wealth, identity, and dignity. But as it usually works in life, the more extreme the hiding, the louder the shadow becomes. And Robert's shadow was about to find him in the form of a quiet, unassuming man named Morris Black. If the universe ever decided to match two people based on chaos energy alone, Robert Durst and Morris Black would be a perfect pairing. Not romantically, but fatally. Morris was in his 70s, cranky, blunt, suspicious of everyone. The kind of man who probably argued with store signs if he didn't like the font. Neighbors described him as difficult, but not dangerous. Lonely, but not unstable. Annoyed at everyone, but not violent. And unfortunately for Robert, Morris was observant. He began noticing things. Dorothy Siner's odd behavior, the The quiet comings and goings, the strange mannerisms, the inconsistencies in movement, the fact that she seemed more like a he trying to be invisible. You know that nosy neighbor trope, the one we laugh at in movies? Turns out, sometimes that nosy neighbor is the only one paying attention to the right person. It didn't take long before Morris grew suspicious. And here's something many people don't think about until it's too late. When you're hiding from something enormous, the smallest suspicion can feel like a spotlight. Morris started asking questions, watching, confronting, following his instincts. And Robert, who had spent decades slipping through the cracks, felt cornered by a man old enough to be his father. Then one day, a confrontation happened. The details remain murky, buried in layers of Robert's shifting stories. But what we do know is this: Robert Durst killed Morris Black. Period. And then dismembered him, and then dumped his body parts in Galveston Bay. Pause for a moment. Let that sink in. A billionaire heir, living as a mute woman, murdering a neighbor, cutting the body into pieces, and throwing them into the water. If this were fiction, editors would beg the writer to tone it down. But real life doesn't care about plausibility. On September 30th, 2001, children fishing in the bay found something bobbing against the shoreline. A human torso, wrapped in plastic bags. No head, no hands, no feet. Homicide detectives arrived. More bags were found. More pieces. More horror. You'd think a crime this gruesome would be impossible to trace back to someone with as much cunning as Robert, right? Well, remember when I said people who hide too dramatically draw attention? Because among all the bags and body parts was one thing Robert didn't expect: the apartment's trash, with mail addressed to him. And just like that, Robert Durst was caught. Or at least, he was supposed to be. Because what happened next is one of those moments in true crime where even the most seasoned investigators scratch their heads and think, this man must be coated in supernatural luck. Police tracked Robert down easily. He didn't resist, didn't hide, didn't try to escape. And you know what he had on him? A fake ID, a wig, $37,000 in cash, 2 guns, and directions to the home of, you guessed it, Susan Berman. Imagine being arrested and the evidence in your bag is basically a self-contained confession kit. Now, normally, when someone is caught with this combination of items during a murder investigation, they don't leave the police station again as a free person. But Robert? He posted bail. For a murder case, with dismemberment, as a fugitive risk. He paid and walked out. You'd think he'd lay low at this point, reflect on his life decisions, maybe sit in a dark room and think, perhaps I should stop committing felonies. No, he fled again. Of course he did. But listen, if you're going to run from the police, maybe do not shoplift a sandwich. Because yes, Robert Durst, billionaire fugitive, was arrested again for stealing a chicken salad sandwich. At this point, I don't even know if this is horror or a dark comedy. Robert was put on trial for the death of Morris Black. And here is where the story becomes almost surreal. He confessed to dismembering the body. He confessed to dumping the body parts. He admitted he fled the state, but he claimed he killed Morris in self-defense. Now, if you're thinking, how do you accidentally dismember someone you killed in self-defense? The jury apparently had the same question. But somehow, after one of the strangest trials in American history, he was acquitted. Not guilty. A man who fled the state dressed as a mute woman, who cut up his neighbor and dumped him into the bay, walked free. Because he had money and lawyers.
The kind of smile only someone who had cheated consequences his whole life could flash.
And he did walk free. For years. But the past doesn't stay buried. Not when the truth is this heavy. And eventually, all the lies, all the masks, all the disappearing acts, all led him to a very specific room. A room filled with cameras, lights, sound equipment, and one microphone he forgot to turn off. You know, there's something that happens when you spend too much time staring at a crime. It starts to stare back. After weeks of digging through Robert Durst's past, I found myself doing something strange. Something I'm not proud to admit. I was talking to the case folder. Yes, me. A grown adult. Talking to a stack of documents like it owed me rent. Just tell me what you're hiding, I whispered one night, hunched over a lamp-lit table. And for a second, just a second, I swear the pages shifted like they were trying to answer. That's what the Durst case does to you. It pulls you into its gravity. It refuses to stay still. And the next part, this is where the ground cracks beneath your feet. Because now, we step into the chapter of Robert's life where the ghosts begin to talk. Not figuratively. Literal people missing. Literal bodies surfacing. Literal trails of fear stretching across decades. But let's start where it all begins to unravel. Let me tell you something. Rich families don't just own houses. They own secrets that come with addresses. And the Dursts? Their properties could probably file police reports of their own. One of these places, a lakeside house in the middle of nowhere, felt wrong from the moment investigators stepped in. You ever walk into a room and feel like someone left in a hurry? Well, this house felt like that, but stretched across 20 years. The air was stale. The wallpaper peeled in odd shapes, almost like the house had been frowning for decades. Cabinets held cups with a thin layer of dust, yet there were footprints on the kitchen tile. Footprints the dust should have hidden. And the strangest part? A single chair facing the lake. Just one. Not a pair. Not a dining set. One. As if someone came back here to think, or confess, or hide. I stood in that room, narrating the scene into my recorder, and I swear it felt like the house was listening. I kept pausing, as if someone else might speak. Maybe I should have taken a break. Maybe touched grass or drank water or called a therapist. But I didn't. Because the deeper you go into this story, the more it pulls you toward the cold, still water outside that window. By now, you've heard the name Kathleen Durst. And if you haven't, prepare to keep thinking about her long after this video ends. Kathleen was Robert Durst's wife. Young, ambitious, bright-eyed in a way that makes you angry, because you know how her story ends. She didn't vanish into thin air. She vanished into a timeline full of contradictions. Robert said they had dinner. Friends said she was scared. Doctors said she showed up bruised weeks earlier. Neighbors heard shouting. The doorman remembers something different every time he tells it. But the worst part? No one. Not the police, not the family, not even Robert himself, ever gave the same story twice. It was like trying to put together a puzzle where every piece is from a different box. Now, here's where I need you to follow me closely, because this part matters. Kathleen didn't just disappear. She disappeared after years of telling people she feared for her life. And when someone says that enough times, you believe them. Unless, of course, you were a cop in 1982 investigating a wealthy New York family. Then you shrugged, stamped missing person, and went home for dinner. Empathy wasn't exactly in abundance in that era. But let me tell you something. When a woman vanishes, her absence fills every room she once walked into. People feel it. Dogs feel it. Even walls feel it. Her friends felt it the moment they realized Robert didn't. Now, you know I like to add some comic relief when I can. Because if not, these stories will drag you to emotional debt. So picture this. I went to see the first apartment Robert and Kathleen lived in. A dingy old building with a staircase that looks like it's seen more crimes than renovations. As I climbed the steps, this elderly man with a broom, who I swear materialized out of nowhere like a video game NPC, stopped me. He squinted at me and said, "You're here for the ghost, aren't you?" I laughed politely. "Because what do you say to that?" Which one?" He shrugged. "The crying one." And walked off. Just walked off. Like he didn't just drop a psychological grenade and disappear. Was he messing with me? Maybe. Probably. Did it work? Yes. Absolutely. I did not touch any more stair rails after that. But standing in the hallway, hearing the faint hum of city traffic outside, the air did feel heavy, like years of fear soaked into the drywall. Kathleen lived here.
Kathleen tried to escape here.
Kathleen whispered her truth here.
And sometimes whispers don't fade.
Now we jump forward to what I call the moment Robert lost the plot entirely. Texas, a quiet town, a boarding house, and Robert Durst hiding under a fake name while dressed like an elderly woman. I'm not exaggerating, not even a little. He literally disguised himself as a mute elderly woman. Not talking wasn't part of the disguise. He just didn't want to risk someone recognizing his voice. I don't know whether to label this chapter bizarre, tragic, absurd, or a bit of all three. But while he was hiding, something else happened. A body surfaced. Pieces of a body, actually. In garbage bags. Floating. Not buried. Not burned. Not concealed with sophistication. Just floating. And somehow, Robert once again slipped through charges like water slipping between fingers. This man had 9 lives. 9 large, suspicious, police report-worthy lives. And in those moments, the world saw something chilling. Durst didn't fear consequences. He feared exposure. Now at this point in the investigation, I'll be honest, I started sleeping with the lights on. Every night I'd dream of rooms half lived in, lakes reflecting secrets, buildings humming with forgotten stories. I'd wake up, grab my notebook, and scribble lines I barely remembered writing. One morning I looked down at my notes and found, "He isn't scared of being caught. He is scared of being known." I don't remember writing that, but it was right. Robert Durst wasn't afraid of jail. He wasn't afraid of police. He was afraid of someone seeing him clearly. Because the moment they did, they'd realize the people closest to him kept vanishing. This is also where the documentary team steps deeper into Robert's orbit. And when I say orbit, I mean that literal gravitational pull I mentioned earlier. Durst had this thing, a mix of awkward charm, unsettling calm, and something else I can't name, that made you lean in. He blinked slowly. He spoke softly. He paused like every sentence was a chess move. But behind the softness was something sharp. Something you didn't want turning its attention toward you. When the filmmakers sat with him, you could see it. The flicker behind his eyes. The way he occasionally drifted off like he was replaying memories he wasn't sure belonged to him anymore. And the way he'd smile at the wrong moments. People forget that the most chilling villains aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who whisper. This is the moment that will echo in documentary history forever. You've probably heard it quoted. You may have even heard the audio. But nothing prepares you for watching it unfold. Because Robert, in a bathroom, not realizing his mic was still hot, muttered something that cracked this entire case open. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. That wasn't a confession. That was a slip of the soul. Even saying it now, I feel a cold ripple down my arms. Because the tone of his voice wasn't regret. It was almost relief. Like someone admitting the truth to themselves for the first time. No audience, no jury, just a man and the echo of his own history. Silence. That's what filled the room when the audio engineer replayed Robert's bathroom whisper for the 10th time. Not shock, not fear, not even excitement. Just silence. The kind of silence you feel in your teeth. The kind that makes you swallow hard, even though your mouth is dry. I remember leaning forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped so tightly I could have broken my own fingers. And then I said something I normally never say out loud. Oh my God. Because what do you say when the monster under the bed finally speaks? What do you say when the chapter you've been writing in pencil suddenly gets ink spilled on it by the very person you're investigating? Nothing prepares you for that moment. Not documentaries, not crime reports, not late-night research sessions fueled by anxiety and instant noodles. Nothing. The documentary team sat there like they'd just watched the sun blink out. And I promise you this. There are two kinds of fear in crime work. The fear of not knowing, and the fear of suddenly knowing too much. This was the second. You could feel the shift. The air grew heavier. Someone exhaled shakily. Maybe me, maybe someone else. And someone whispered, "Are we in danger?" I won't lie. The thought crossed my mind too. Durst wasn't just someone with a suspicious past. He wasn't just someone tied to disappearances. He wasn't just someone who had outmaneuvered police for decades. He was someone who had nothing left to lose. And nothing is more dangerous than a man with nothing left to lose. Here's the thing about big revelations. They don't spread like wildfire. They spread like dominoes. Slowly, then suddenly. Call 1, a lawyer. Call 2, producers in disbelief. Call 3, a network executive who probably dropped his coffee. Call 4, detectives. And here's where things get interesting. One detective, I won't name him, but imagine the kind of man whose face always looks like he's halfway through a moral dilemma. Listen to the audio in total silence. Then he said it. No drama, no theatrics, just fact. But the next words he said were the ones that gave me goosebumps. We reopen everything. Remember earlier when I told you that dark pasts don't stay buried? This was the moment that past earnestly began clawing its way out. Files long closed were pulled from shelves. Old evidence boxes were cracked open. Photos that had faded at the edges were laid out under new light. I stood in an archive room watching detectives blow dust off folders like they were waking the dead. Every document felt heavier than the paper it was printed on, as if the weight of forgotten truth had seeped into the fibers. You ever see adults who have seen everything suddenly look like they're seeing something for the first time? That's what it was like. But as the investigating team dove in deeper, something else surfaced. Something that still keeps me uneasy. Before I step into this part, let me give you a small comic relief break. Because what I'm about to tell you is both horrifying and unintentionally hilarious. Investigators found a letter. A letter someone had written to the police to alert them about a body. It simply read, cadaver. Just that word. No explanation, no apology, not even, "Hey guys, hope you're well. By the way, dead body." Just cadaver. Now imagine a killer so bold he writes a one-word letter and spells Beverly Hills wrong. You cannot make this up. And guess what? Robert Durst wrote letters all the time. And guess what else? He spelled Beverly Hills wrong, the exact same way. When the investigators compared the handwriting side by side, my stomach dropped. My narration recorder literally caught me saying, "Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's very bad." Because in the world of crime, handwriting is like fingerprints wearing a disguise. They still betray you. The moment the matching letters appeared on screen in the editing room, everyone froze. One producer whispered, "He wrote the cadaver letter." And someone else said, "Then he put the body there." The room felt colder after that. Now, you know me. I always try to put myself in the locations, soak in the atmosphere, smell the furniture if I have to. Not literally. Okay, maybe once, but that's a story for another documentary. So I went to the sheriff's office where the case had been reopened. The building felt old, like it had held more secrets than confessions. The walls were cream-colored but somehow stained with time. The hum of the AC was louder than the detectives talking. On one desk, a stack of photos. On another, maps with red circles around certain areas. In the corner, a whiteboard listing possible charges. As I stood there, one detective looked up at me and said, "You know what's crazy? Every time we think we've reached the bottom of this case, it goes deeper." I nodded, because that's exactly how it felt. Like trying to find the bottom of the ocean using a flashlight. Then he leaned close, and this next part stayed with me. It's like he's been confessing for decades, just not loudly enough for anyone to listen. You ever have a sentence hit you like a brick to the chest? That one did. Now this part? This is where Durst starts acting like a villain in a movie who's running out of script pages. Once he realized everything was catching up with him, Robert made a decision. He ran. Not to a cozy cabin, not to a beach, not to a small town where no one would question his existence. He ran to New Orleans. Why? Because Durst's decisions rarely made sense outside of his own mind. When the FBI tracked him down, he was staying in a hotel under a fake name. They found cash, fake IDs, a latex mask, a full beard prosthetic, a map marked with locations, and oh, a gun. I remember shaking my head slowly as I read the list, thinking, "Brother, this is not Mission Impossible." The man had basically packed a villain's starter kit. When they finally arrested him, he looked surprised, as if he genuinely believed the universe would keep letting him slip through cracks like water. And here's the true sting of the final moment of his flight. Robert Durst, worth hundreds of millions, having just paid an enormous bail, was traveling with a rubber mask, a pistol, and $50,000 in cash. He chose disguise and flight over dignity and truth. Always. But the cracks had closed, the floor had hardened, and the storm he'd kept outrunning for decades finally caught him. This trial wasn't just a trial, it was a cleansing.
It was decades of silence finally demanding payment. And sitting in the courtroom, I felt something strange. Not relief, not satisfaction, but this heavy emptiness. Because on one side of the room you had Robert, older now, smaller even, the kind of old age that comes from running from shadows instead of time. On the other side, friends of victims, family, people who had spent their entire adult lives waiting for answers. And in the middle, the truth, finally standing up. Listening to witnesses felt like listening to ghosts return to finish their stories. Kathleen's name echoed. Susan's name echoed. Morris Black's name echoed. Every echo felt like another piece of Robert's carefully built facade cracking and falling away. And the Jinx, the documentary itself, suddenly became more than a film. It became evidence. It became momentum.
It became a voice for people who'd been denied one. And here's something I've never said out loud. When the producers realized their documentary had sparked a homicide investigation, some of them cried. Not loud sobs, not dramatic breakdowns, just quiet tears. The kind that slip out when you finally see justice get out of bed after sleeping for too long. One whispered, I didn't think we'd actually change something. And in that dim editing room, surrounded by coffee cups and footage reels, I felt something warm in my chest. It was hope. Faint, small, but real. Durst, for the first time in his long, tangled life, was cornered. No disguises, no runaway plans, no helpful family name. Just truth. Cold, sharp, unavoidable truth. And when the verdict was finally spoken, the room didn't explode with relief. No cheers, no gasps, just breaths. Quiet breaths of people who had held the air in their chests for 40 years. And then, the hammer fell. Robert Durst was found guilty, and for the first time, the past stopped running. The final, simple, haunting reality. Some dark pasts don't fade. They wait. They gather dust. They gather silence. And then, at the right moment, they rise. The truth finally spoke. The walls finally answered back. And the man who outran everything finally met something he couldn't outrun. Time. That is the one consequence money can never buy your way out of.